Facebook fact liars and no dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the Millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer. This podcast is called Facebook Fact Liars. And I want to welcome everyone to Mark and the Millennials. As our audience is growing, we're very proud of that. Please remember to like us on Rumble and subscribe on Rumble, as well as subscribe on YouTube and subscribe on Facebook and every other social media outlet you can possibly imagine, because the audience is growing, and that's a good thing. We need you to share our videos to get this information out. We also have information today about the Stop Woke Act, which is a new bill that's being proposed by the great governor of Florida. That's Stop the Woke Act. And we're going to talk about that. We have some just amazing clips from that particular press conference of the great governor of Florida. First up, Facebook fact liars. Well, in the New York Post and every other major news outlet across the country, except, of course, MSNBC and CBS and ABC and NBC and CNN, they're not reporting it. But everywhere else, Facebook admits the truth. Fact checks are really just opinions of their left-wing employees. This is the New York Post. Facebook finally admitted the truth. The fact checks that social media use to police what Americans read and watch are just opinion. That's thanks to a lawsuit brought by celebrated journalist John Stossel, which has exposed the left's supposed battle against misinformation as a farce. Stossel posted a pair of videos that touched the third rail of liberal politics, climate change. Neither questioned whether climate change is real, but each talked about other issues, namely forest management and using technology to adapt. Yet, the third party that Facebook contracts to review these pieces, Science Feedback, flagged them as false, or, our favorite, lacking context. Why? Science Feedback, which is one of Facebook's fact checkers, didn't like Stossel's tone. That is, you can't write anything about climate change unless it says it's an awful disaster and the worst disaster in the history of humanity, and we must spend trillions to fight it. So you're allowed to write that. For this, Facebook bans or minimizes Stossel's reporting, depriving him of readers and revenue. Then, when Stossel sued Facebook, Facebook throws up its hands and says, not our problem. His real beef is with Science Feedback, the organization that Facebook contracts out to check the facts. You see, Facebook washes its hands of it. As for that fact check label that was slapped on your piece, in Facebook's response to Stossel, it argues, well, that's protected opinion under the First Amendment. So in other words, Facebook podcast listeners is saying that when they place a fact check label on your Facebook post, that with Facebook, their opinion is protected under the First Amendment, but not yours. So you're not allowed to have a First Amendment right on Facebook unless it's the correct First Amendment opinion. The Post has faced this same gauntlet, so many times. In February 2020, we published a column by Stephen W. Mosher asking if COVID-19 leaked from the Wuhan lab. This was labeled false by Facebook fact checkers. Of course, those supposed independent scientific reviewers relied on a group of experts who had vested interests in dismissing that theory, including EcoHealth, which had funded the Wuhan lab, by the way. When Twitter fact-checked and blocked the Post's stories about Hunter Biden's laptop as hacked materials, what was the basis? Nothing. It wasn't hacked. The company staff just wanted an excuse. Guess they didn't like our tone. In both these cases, our fact checks were lifted, but only after it no longer mattered, because obviously the post had long since passed its prime, and Facebook made sure that with their algorithm, no one actually got to see it. The fact-checked industry is funded by liberal moguls such as George Soros, government-funded nonprofits, and the tech giants themselves. The checkers are not unbiased arbiters of truth. They are useful distractions, groups Facebook can use to absolve itself of responsibility. Free speech be damned. So, folks, that's an editorial by the New York Post editorial board. Super well written, but also bringing something up that we kind of always really knew, namely that Facebook wasn't fact-checking you. Facebook was simply disputing what you say because they disagree with what you say, not because they disagree with the facts of what you say. Now, while you may say, hey, we always knew this, we always knew this was the case, it's a lot different from having an actual lawsuit by John Stossel and then finding out and confirming that it is the case. And so you might be asking yourself, what is it that I can do to make this better for our country? What can I do? What can I possibly do to make this better? Well, there is Rumble, for example. And then separately from Rumble, Trump is building a network, a social network that's going to hopefully compete with Facebook. So first on the Rumble side, and by the way, the Trump organization, through their publicly traded SPAC that they intend to use, the SPAC to go public, to bring the Trump social media competitor to Facebook public, is going to use Rumble as their kind of YouTube substitute for obvious reasons, since they're not going to use YouTube because YouTube does the same thing as Facebook, because YouTube is Google and YouTube is big tech. So what I recommend to you is this. Rumble is building a new headquarters in Florida. And Rumble is the only platform that I'm aware of that's going to be able to hopefully compete against YouTube. Obviously, Rumble dwarfs in comparison to YouTube. Here's my recommendation to you, podcast listeners. Go online and buy the Rumble stock. Go online and buy the stock from the Trump media company that's going to compete against Facebook. So that's two separate stocks. Both stocks are separate stocks, but they're both going to be brought public by a SPAC. And those SPACs you'll be able to find online. Just Google Rumble and Google Trump's media company. Just Google both, and you will find that they're both available to purchase stocks online, and that will demonstrate your support of these companies. The more money they raise, the higher their stock price goes. The more money they're able to raise, the higher stock price goes, the more money they're going to be able to borrow and bring into these companies and bring them to scale so that they can compete with Facebook and so that they can compete with YouTube. So enough already about all of us complaining, podcast listeners, including me, by the way, about, oh my God, social media is totally corrupt. Well, of course, they're corrupt. We know that. Oh my gosh, social media is so unfair. We know that. Oh my gosh, big tech is not on our side. I got that too. Now we have an opportunity to do something, right? I mean, imagine when these two companies, they're certainly Rumble is already up and running. The Trump media company, I'm not sure so much is. I'm presuming they're using Parler. Is that what they're doing? Is it? I think that's maybe Parler, which, by the way, I'll readily admit was never very good. We can only hope that they modernize it and bring it into the 21st century. But it doesn't miss this point, which is we have to support these alternatives, not just with our social media posts, but with our money. And it's the only way we're going to be able to compete. Because if Google, if Alphabet, if YouTube, and then if Facebook, otherwise known as Metaverse now, if these two companies, if these, Alphabet and Metaverse, have half of their users leave, because half of the country is clearly conservative. I actually would argue it's more than half, but certainly let's, for the sake of argument, say half. If half of the country that is on social media decides to leave those two companies, if they do leave those two companies, then it will get their attention, because they will be a fraction of their current size. It's not what they expected. Okay. It's not what they are counting on. It's certainly not what their stockholders are counting on, because their stockholders are counting on unlimited and unending growth. And when you say to your stockholders, oh, well, you see, in the past 12 months, we've lost 80 million of our subscribers. And those 80 million subscribers were actually from the United States of America, where people actually have money and spend money on advertising. That will have an impact. So podcast listeners, again, my suggestion to you, my suggestion that's a constructive suggestion, is go online and buy these two stocks and get your friends to do the same. Because when they do that, it drives up the price. And the more the price is driven up, the more market capitalization these companies have, the more they're going to be able to borrow or issue bonds, whatever the case may be, potentially issue more stock, so that they can get enough money in the till to get to critical mass and actually compete on a fair playing field with Alphabet and with Metaverse. That is my suggestion. So let's do that. By the way, I'm already in the process of doing that, so I'm not telling you or asking you to do something that I wouldn't do myself. And I know it's risky, right? The risky part is when you invest your own money in these companies that are not proven, and let's face it, they are not proven because they don't make any money today. You could lose the money that you put in. But what's the alternative? Losing a little money or losing your country? I think I'd rather lose a little money and put my money on these free speech sites. So let's do that together. And I think it's really great advice. So next up, podcast listeners, stop woke act. I couldn't make this up if I tried. Stop the woke act. So Florida says no. DeSantis unveils Stop Woke Act, woke in all caps, to remove CRT from schools and workplaces. Governor Ron DeSantis unveiled new legislation earlier Wednesday, that was yesterday, so it's brand new, that moves to stop the use of critical race theory in schools and workplaces across the Sunshine State. And this particular bill is going to be fantastic. He has just put the bill together. He's constructed the bill, and he's going to introduce the bill into the legislature when it meets the next session. And so DeSantis tweets out, today, we are taking a stand against critical race theory in our schools and in the workplace by calling for the enforcement of Stop the WOKE Act. Well, podcast listeners, we have a wonderful series of clips on this. You're going to love it. It's quite a few clips, and all of the clips are from DeSantis, the governor of Florida, talking in his press conference about Stop the Woke Act. I must tell you, for all of you conservatives out there, for all of you patriots out there, this is the best governor in the United States. Not only the smartest governor, not only the governor that is able to truly articulate the values of our Constitution and the values of the conservative movement, but he is actually doing it. Like, he's actually putting into policy what we, the people who are conservatives, believe, what we, the people who believe in our founding and believe in our Constitution, want to see happen in our own states. This is the only guy that I see in the country that is just pounding away at the left by using his intellect and by using what we believe. Yes, it's true, there are other governors in the country who are conservatives, but they are not pounding away at the left and chipping away at the crazy left piece by piece like the governor of Florida is. So podcast listeners, this is called Stop the Woke Act, this bill being introduced by the governor of Florida. So he had a press conference yesterday. And in the press conference, he provides a lot of background detail about why this bill is necessary. And then he talks about what the bill will do. So I have a series of clips on this. Believe me, this is worth listening to. First up, a short clip from DeSantis talking about the bill itself and introducing it to everyone at his press conference. We have that clip, and here it is.
So we want all our students to understand, why was our country founded? What were some of the key ideas that made us different? I mean, for example, our founding fathers said that we are endowed by our Creator with unalienable rights. The rights do not come from government. So these are natural rights, and we create a constitutional system not to give us rights, but to protect the rights that we already have. And we have a constitutional system that's laid out, and not just having a judiciary, an executive, a legislature, but also having 50 state governments and federalism and all these different things that are designed to be able to maintain and preserve a free society.
So that first clip tells you about the basic intellect of this gentleman, right? Certainly, you've read the Constitution of the United States, podcast listeners. And it's rare, though, that you hear a governor who again and again and again reminds the citizens of his state. And in this case, I believe DeSantis is really speaking for the entire country as kind of our president in waiting. Certainly our conservative president in waiting. Here you have this governor talking about the fact that your rights don't come from government. Your rights are granted to you and given to you by God, and they cannot be taken away. And so he sets up, DeSantis does, his press conference as he talks about the Stop the Woke Act. And he first talks about the country's founding and why it's necessary, and then continues about how our country has been tested in the past and how its constitution has been tested, and then brings it full circle to where we are today and how it's being tested once again. So first up, we have how our country has been tested before. We have that clip from DeSantis, and here it is.
I mean, if you look at President Lincoln, when before he became president running for the Senate, he was running against a guy named Stephen Douglas. And Douglas was basically saying that, the founders, wanted slavery. It was important to have. And all of a sudden Lincoln said, no, that wasn't what they wanted. They disfavored it. They wanted it to go away. They created the Declaration of Independence to say everybody had rights. And so Lincoln prevailed ultimately in that debate once he became elected president. And then you look at what people in our country have done, defeating Nazism in World War II, when the world really hung in the balance. And that was America that did it. And they did it because they believed in having a free society. You think about what MLK stood for. He said he didn't want people judged on the color of their skin, but on the content of their character. You listen to some of these people nowadays, they don't talk about that.
So, who else is speaking this way? Podcast listeners, think about this for one moment. Does anyone on the left speak this way at all? Does any governor, does any congressman, does any United States senator on the left speak this way? Does any member of any state legislature on the left speak this way? No. In fact, there are still many conservatives that don't speak this way, and in part because they just don't know. They haven't studied any of these things. I mean, they say they have, but they haven't. And in part because maybe they just don't believe it anymore. But here's a governor who does. And he just gave us, in that clip that you heard, a short history lesson of the country's founding. Then Lincoln came along in the Lincoln-Douglas debates. And Lincoln wanted us to realize our full potential, understanding that slavery was wrong. And then our country moved on to Marxism and totalitarianism and fought that, and people put their lives on the line because people are supposed to be free. And that as time has progressed, our country continues to realize the Declaration's true intent. And so DeSantis continues with this next clip, setting up the Stop the Woke Act. We had that clip, and here it is.
And then more recently, it was the United States that was able to win the Cold War and defeat Soviet communism. Now, I think that there's more of these people coming out of the woodwork than we ever thought nowadays, which is unfortunate. And there's a lot of problems with Marxism in our hemisphere, and we see what's going on with authoritarian countries like China. But nevertheless, people thought that we wouldn't be able to beat the Soviet Union, and we did it. And so these are really important things that people need to have a great understanding of. And I think what you see now with the rise of this woke ideology is an attempt to really delegitimize our history and to delegitimize our institutions. And I view the wokeness as a form of cultural Marxism. They want to tear...
That's right. So the governor says, I view this wokeness as a form of cultural Marxism because, naturally, you use cultural Marxism to tear at the very fabric and foundation of your country. And that way, if you are successful, then you've destroyed effectively the truly and the only truly free society left on the planet. Certainly there are other democracies on the planet, but let's face it, none like ours, none that is as resilient as ours. And so DeSantis also talks about the fact that, we defeated these ideologies, not just during World War II, but post-World War II, where we defeated the communists in Russia, and we did so without firing a single gun because of the strength of our political system, the strength of the Constitution, and the strength of the Declaration. That's how we beat the Soviets and Marxism then. But now, DeSantis says, now it's here in our country. And we have cultural Marxism that is taking root in our country, but the only true way it can take root is by indoctrinating children. And so next up, we have the next clip from DeSantis, protecting children from predators. We had that clip, and here it is.
But they really want to tear at the fabric of our society and our culture and things that really we've taken for granted, like the ability of parents to direct the upbringing of their kids. So this is really, really significant. And when you see these things throughout the country, where they take down Thomas Jefferson's statue in New York City, where they take down Abraham Lincoln in Massachusetts, where they take George Washington's name off schools in California, that is an attempt to erase history. They want to delegitimize the founding of the country and the institutions, and they basically want to replace it with a very militant form of leftism that would absolutely destroy this country if that ever took hold. And so we have a responsibility to stand for the truth, to stand for what's right, and we're doing that, and we've put more resources and emphasis on teaching civics, on teaching people about American history. But we also have to protect people and protect our kids from some very pernicious ideologies that are trying to be forced upon them all across the country.
We have to protect our children, DeSantis said, from these predators. And the predators are the cultural Marxists who know that they can't convince you and I that Marxism is evil. They can't convince you and I that totalitarianism is evil because we have read history and we have a sense of history and understand it. But you know who doesn't? Our children. Children are vulnerable, and you can impress upon them all of your twisted little ideas, but only if you don't tell the parents that you're doing it. Only if you're doing it in a really sneaky way. And you use all kinds of code words so that the children hear it enough times that by the time they graduate from high school, they're completely and utterly indoctrinated with the idea that where they live is evil and where the Chinese live and the CCP is good. Can you imagine a country that has between 1 and 3 million slaves, Uyghur slaves, in China that we know about, not to mention millions of political prisoners as well that just disappear. Because, in China, they don't want to spend money to put you in a prison and house you that long. They'll just kill you and you'll just disappear forever. And it's like you never existed. Talk about erasing history. So next, from DeSantis in the same press conference, he's going to talk about prohibiting CRT in the public school system. Here's the clip.
So earlier this year, I directed the Florida Department of Education to prohibit critical race theory in our K through 12 schools.
But now the Stop the Woke Act, because in the Stop the Woke Act, he wants to give you examples of what CRT is. He's done a great job. That's why we're playing these clips for you one at a time, because he builds on why the Stop the Woke Act is necessary. So earlier this year, the legislature in Florida and the governor signed a bill to prohibit CRT in schools. And then DeSantis begins to talk in this press conference about the examples of CRT. Not necessarily as obvious as you think, because the chances of your school having CRT, podcast listeners, your kids' schools having CRT, very high, by the way. You just may not recognize what's being taught to them because it's not called CRT. It's called a lot of other things. And here's the clip.
Well, let me show you some of the things that have been done throughout our country just in the last couple years. The Arizona Department of Education created a, quote, equity toolkit, claiming that babies show the first sign of racism at 3 months old, and that white children become full racists, quote, strongly biased in favor of whiteness by age 5. Santa Clara County Office of Education denounced the United States as a, quote, parasitic system based on, quote, the invasion of, quote, white male settlers, and encouraged teachers to cash in on kids' inherent empathy in order to recruit them into political activism. And a Philadelphia elementary school forced fifth graders to celebrate Black communism and simulated a Black Power rally to, quote, free Angela Davis from prison. And at that particular school, 87% of students fail to achieve basic literacy by graduation.
So there you go. So in Philadelphia, you have to teach them about Black communism, but you can't read. You can't read, can't do math, can't do simple math, by the way. I'm not even talking about algebra. You can't do simple math. You can't read and write. You're completely dysfunctional in society at every level because you don't have a proper K-12 education. And all the more reason to teach the children to hate your country. I mean, that's what's happening. You heard DeSantis build upon this press conference, and now he's giving you exactly what you wanted to hear, which is these examples across the country of what's happening in your kids' schools. And I can tell you, podcast listeners, as I said before, the chances of there being at least just one teacher in your school, your kids' schools, that are teaching this nonsense, the chances of that are almost 100%. And in no way is DeSantis saying, well, let's purge the teachers, because that would be wrong. You don't want to have a purge of teachers. What you want to do instead is have proper curriculum, which is taught in an historically correct way. Okay? Not a politically correct way, an historically correct way. So that leads up to the Stop the Woke Act explanation. And we have 3 remaining clips where DeSantis, after he builds upon this press conference of why the Stop Woke Act is important, he explains what the act will do. It's quite brilliant. I highly recommend you pull up this bill and that you get your state legislature to pass the same bill. Makes perfect sense to me. So first up, he begins to explain what this act does. Here's the clip.
And this will do a number of things that are very important. One, it will put into statute the Department of Education's prohibition on CRT in K through 12 schools. No taxpayer dollars should be used to teach our kids to hate our country or to hate each other.
So, kind of common sense, right? No taxpayer dollars can teach children that they should hate one another simply because of the way they look. And here's the next clip. The next, we only have 2 clips left. It's just unbelievable, epic, best governor in America. Here's the clip.
You can legislate things like Parents' Bill of Rights. You can have certain things, and sometimes the school districts don't always follow it. And so we are going to be including in this legislation giving parents a private right of action to be able to enforce the prohibition on CRT, and they get to recover attorney's fees when they prevail, which is very important.
So that's the enforcement mechanism, right? So the bill just doesn't say, oh, we are banning your ability to teach children to hate one another based on the way they look. It doesn't just say that. The bill, Stop the Woke Act, also has an enforcement mechanism. The enforcement mechanism is basically you and I, the parents. The parents can have a right of action by suing. This legislation allows them to sue their school system. And if you've ever been in a lawsuit, you know that this is so. First, you sue someone, you file the lawsuit. The next thing that happens is you depose individuals that have committed the wrong. And when you depose them, they have to answer questions under oath that are asked of them. So it would be your attorney, their attorney, you, and the defendants. And your attorney gets to ask them any and every question under the sun about what they are teaching, to explain how they're teaching it, to explain the curriculum, to explain why they're using this term equity and what it means, and why are they teaching equity, as if it is not just a word to learn what it means, but instead teaching it as if it is the only way. Outcomes must be exactly the same, no matter the effort put in. And so DeSantis just isn't making it illegal to teach CRT. He's saying the enforcement mechanism is you and I, because we know that the teachers, not all teachers, by the way, but many teachers and administrators are sneaking this in, and they're doing it in a very clever way. And it's very difficult for us to prove what they're doing, but we know they're doing it because we see some of the assignments, and that gives us a right of action, a private right of action. We sue the school system, we depose these individuals, and we make them, for the first time, answer for what they're doing. Brilliant. And here's the final clip where the governor explains Stop the Woke Act. We have that clip, and here it is.
We also need to understand that this has become a cottage industry, this CRT. There's people making huge amounts of money. They basically will get tens of thousands of dollars to go in and do a training, sometimes at schools, sometimes at businesses, basically saying like, okay, pay me $50,000 so I can teach your employees how racist capitalism is, or something like that. And I'm just thinking to myself, well, you shouldn't be charging a king's ransom to do that. You don't complain about capitalism when you're lining your own pocket. It's just when other people are doing well. But the issue is you have these whole cottage industry of these consultants that will come and they'll go into a school district, or they'll go to a business, and they'll go to colleges and universities, and they bring a lot of this into those institutions, and they call it equity. Just understand, when you hear equity used, that is just an ability for people to smuggle in their ideology, because we don't need to have these terms. We have society based on equality, where you're treated equally regardless of your upbringing, regardless of your race. You have the same rights and privileges as anybody else. Equity is used to put the thumb on the scale in favor of their ideology. And so that's where you get things like CRT and a whole host of other things. So our legislation will defund any money for K-12 or higher ed going to CRT consultants.
So the Stop the Woke Act will say, if you try to hire a consultant as a public school system, K-12 or higher ed, and that consultant is teaching anything that has the word equity in it, you will be defunded. You will be defunded. And rightfully so. And podcast listeners, in my own public school system, our superintendent was brought in front of our local board of county commissioners being the elected body that runs the county. There are 5 of them in my county, and they're all equally, they have the same amount of votes. They each have a vote, and they're all executives. So it's 5 county commissioners. And they brought in the superintendent. The superintendent is an appointed position. And our superintendent was asked by one of the county commissioners if CRT was being taught in Calvert County Public Schools. And our superintendent, rather than actually being honest, decided to say, well, we are not teaching CRT in Calvert County schools. And then went on to use the word equity about 4 or 5 times about how equity was being taught in this class and that class, and it's important that we have equity and so forth. And so in other words, CRT is being taught in our public school system in my own county. And it's because we have allowed it to happen. Now, unfortunately, my county is not in the great state of Florida, because if it were, and the superintendent decided to continue to do that, to continue to use this word equity and teach it to children, he would have been fired a long time ago. And these systems that they put in place, which are brought in place by these consultants, would be eliminated as well. And I can guarantee you, your public school system has some individuals, or at least one school or more, if not all schools, that are teaching equity and teaching CRT. And again, equity means equality of outcome. It is Marxism. You must have equality of outcome. So therefore, you must make everybody else less special and less exceptional, no matter how much work they put in. And then you must redistribute to everybody else because of equity. My God, folks, that's Marxism. It's exactly what Marxism is. And yet, it takes the governor from Florida to wake us up about the solution. Because we've talked about this many times before. And by the way, you can hear plenty of other radio personalities or whoever they may be, no matter how popular that they may be, much more popular than us, I'm sure. And they're going to complain endlessly about CRT. The difference is, here on Mark and the Millennials, we're actually offering solutions. And we're providing solutions. In this case, it's the governor of Florida that has an amazing solution. And this bill, Stop Woke Act, is only one of like 3 or 4 bills that he's passed recently. Stop Woke Act, again, is a bill that's brand new that has not yet been passed, but I can assure you it will be. But he's passed other bills as well, including a Parents' Bill of Rights and all kinds of other bills that are just brilliant, that all work really well together, that make teachers and superintendents actually teach the children and remove the ideology out of the public school system. Remove their personal opinions about Marxism and about equity and about CRT. Keep that out of public school system. Teach actual history. Teach social studies. Teach children to be successful when they leave K-12. And it took this governor to do that. And as I said, there is no other elected official, in my opinion, in the United States of America today that has this level of intellect and at the same time has married the intellect to the policy to properly articulate the conservative vision moving forward. This is the guy that needs to be president of the United States. I mean, obviously, you know that I believe that, but he is Trump, but Trump policies with the ability to actually articulate the benefit of those policies in an historical context. And that's something that we need very badly. So next up, podcast listeners, Comrade Blumenthal, Comrade Senator Blumenthal. You won't believe this. So we just talked about equity and Marxism. And how we have a United States senator that just received an award from the Communist Party. So Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat of Connecticut, spoke at an awards ceremony for labor activists and union leaders over the weekend that was hosted by a group affiliated with the Communist Party. During the ceremony, Blumenthal presented certificates to 3 winners of the Amistad Award, which is given out annually by the Connecticut People's World Committee, a group affiliated with the Communist Party. And it's the Communist Party of the USA. The event took place over the weekend on the occasion of the 102nd anniversary of the Communist Party USA, according to the event's Facebook page. Quote, "I am really excited and honored to be with you today and share in this remarkable occasion," Blumenthal said at the ceremony. According to the Yankee Institute, quote, "There's a lot to be working for in economic justice, in racial equity, in establishing a $15 minimum wage, and holding corporations accountable for the basic treatment of the American people. We need to look at our entire tax system, beginning with Build Back Better," the senator continued. Now, keep in mind, podcast listeners, that Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut is one of the richest men in politics in America, from Connecticut. And he's talking this nonsense like, we need to redo our tax system and, get those big rich people. Well, why don't you start with you, Senator? Why don't you write a check for your entire net worth to the United States government and lead the way? If this is what you really believe, if you really believe in Marxism, you would do it first because you just received an award from them. So how about if you write the check for your hundreds and millions of dollars of net worth to the Treasury? Problem solved. Problem solved. That's what a true communist would do. That's what a true Marxist would do. But the guy's a liar. Of course he is. He's a phony. Connecticut People's World Committee is run by Joel Fishman, who also serves as chair of the Political Action Commission, CPUSA, which is the Communist Party USA, according to People's World. People's World, gotta love that magazine. Anything with the word People's World or People's Justice, it's always communist. At the event, MC Ben McManus encouraged individuals to join the Communist Party as it seeks to uproot systemic racism, retool the war economy, tax the rich, address climate change, secure voting rights, and create a new socialist system that puts people, peace, and planet before profits, according to the Yankee Institute. So, podcast listeners, let's break this down for a minute. We've been talking during this podcast about Marxism and about CRT, among other things. And here is the Communist Party of America giving its highest award to United States Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut and the MC, Ben McManus of the United States Communist Party, gives all of the talking points of the Democrat Party. Namely, uproot systemic racism. That's CRT, by the way. Retool the war economy. Tax the rich. Address climate change. Secure voting rights and create a new socialist system that puts people, peace, and planet before profits. So it's proof that the Communist Party's objectives and policy preferences are completely aligned with the Democrat Party. Climate change. Voting rights, which means no voter ID, mass mail-in ballot harvesting, right? That's what they mean by voting rights. As if you don't have the right to vote today. What a bunch of nonsense. Uproot systemic racism, which is part of their game on voting rights, right? If you're black, you don't have the right to vote. Yeah, that was like, I don't know, the beginning of last century, mid-last century, And then, of course, the famous one, which is climate change, which naturally is a euphemism today for complete takeover of the economy where the government controls all means of production and every aspect of your life. That would be climate change, because Naturally, they can't parse out climate change to individual policy preferences like, well, let's get rid of CO2, as much CO2 as we can in the atmosphere. Okay, problem solved. It's called nuclear energy. But no, they call it climate change. That way you can never actually solve the problem. And it gives the communists, which are the Democrats today, the Marxists, the ability to take over the means of production. So Blumenthal has repeatedly invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in a Chinese government-linked real estate venture, according to the Washington Free Beacon. I'm going to say that again. Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut has repeatedly invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in a Chinese government-linked real estate venture, according to the Washington Free Beacon. Business involvement with China has come under scrutiny due to China's ever-increasing efforts to exploit its collaboration with U.S. enterprises. And podcast listeners, that's exactly what we've all suspected for a long time, right? Not necessarily about this particular senator, but just about our system in general, namely that the Chinese, the CCP, Communist Party of China, has gotten their businesses, which, let's face it, the CCP controls every business in China because they can. They'll just kill you if you don't agree. The CCP has gotten all of the businesses in China to try to do business and co-opt U.S. businesses by saying, hey, if you want to do business in China, then you need to buckle under the CCP's pressure if you say anything bad about China. And we also want you to implement the same crazy policies in the U.S. and be woke, just like the Chinese Marxists. And Blumenthal, this senator, this U.S. senator who just received this highest award from the United States Communist Party, has invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in a Chinese government-linked real estate venture. So he's part and parcel of the Marxist regime. And you might say, oh, well, Mark, he has the right to invest anywhere he wants to. Well, yeah, you do in a free society. Yeah, you do. But if you're a United States senator and you represent a place like Connecticut, which is literally falling apart at the seams because of the left's control of Connecticut, wouldn't you invest your money in your own state to try to build up that state? Try to improve the buildings in that state? Invest in a real estate venture in your own state? Why would you do it in China? And the reason why you would do it in China is because you're trying to get as much favor with the Chinese government as you can, including make a lot of money, because I'm sure the Chinese would love nothing more than to suddenly give Senator Blumenthal millions of dollars of return on his hundreds of thousands of dollars of investment, and that way he's bought and paid for. That's why United States senators should be barred from investing in China. But they're not. They're not. And you won't read this stuff anywhere. Maybe you'll read it in the New York Post and the Fox News and maybe a couple of other remote newspapers. But you're not gonna see it anywhere else. And this is important stuff because it goes to real time what's happening in our country. It's why big tech is censoring conservatives, because they're being co-opted by the Chinese government. It's kind of obvious, right? Why else would they willingly do that? There is no reason. There is no reason. And so, way to go, Comrade Blumenthal. Next up, podcast listeners, we have Go Woke or Go Broke, and it's kind of amazing, and not to mention we got a funny side of this too, Go Woke or Go Broke. So a Denver school endorses Jim Crow. You heard that correctly. A school in Denver, Colorado has endorsed Jim Crow. They have a sign out front of the school. The school is Centennial Elementary School in Denver, Colorado. And you know how schools have that sign out front and it tells you what's happening that week in the school or that night in the school? It's like, oh, tonight is bingo night. We're going to raise money for our cheer team, something like that. That's what you would expect to see at an elementary school. Or tonight is chess night. Join us. that kind of thing. That's what you would expect to see. No, on this little sign out in front of Centennial Elementary School, their official sign, it says, Families of Color Playground Night. Families of Color Playground Night. I mean, literally, it's Jim Crow. I mean, you have Jim Crow, but in reverse? I mean, I don't get it. So an elementary school in Denver, and by the way, this is in the Insider magazine, but all the Denver papers too. It happened. It's a thing. An elementary school in Denver faces backlash on social media for organizing a Families of Color Playground Night. A huge sign promoting the event was spotted by writers Chris Rufo, senior fellow and director of the Initiative on Critical Race Theory at the Manhattan Institute think tank. Rufo said in a tweet on Tuesday that he was told by Centennial Elementary School, which was hosting the event, that playground night had been organized by the Institute's Dean of Culture. Sounds like a Marxist organization. Dean of Culture, Nicole Timbrock, but was subsequently canceled due to COVID-19 protocols. The event is currently listed on the school's website as taking place every second Wednesday of the month. Again, Families of Color Playground Night. So you get to go if you are a member of the Families of Color. Not really sure what that is. Also on Fox News, Denver Elementary School under fire for planning Families of Color Playground Night. Same thing, right? It's all across the news media. Not on the left, by the way, because that's impossible. So the funny part about this is, obviously, there's the sad part, which is the fact that people think this shouldn't be happening in America. I mean, it's completely antithetical to our nation's founding and just idiotic and stupid. But the Babylon Bee, they picked us up, man. Here's what the Babylon Bee has. KKK disbands as progressive left accomplishing all their goals. So, it says, in Harrison, Arkansas, obviously what they meant was Colorado, but it's a spoof. It was a somber day for white hooded members of the Ku Klux Klan as they received news that their organization was disbanding, since the progressive left was accomplishing all of their goals with unparalleled effectiveness. Quote, "Welp, I guess it's good news and bad news," said current CEO of the KKK, Bob Eugenics. Bob Eugenics. While overseeing Klan members turning in their robes and pointed hats. Them lefties cornered the racism market for sure, and look at how they undermine minority communities through low school standards, drug legalization, and rampant decriminalization. Impressive. The head of the now dissolved KKK reassured the gloomy crowd, reminding them that it was an honor to pass the baton of hate and division to people with their division to people with their tentacles deeply woven into American politics, education, business, and entertainment. Racism is in good hands, he said, misty-eyed. Following the disbandment meeting, the former members excitedly showed their support for the new face of racism and hate by donating to Ilhan Omar's campaign. So again, that's the Babylon Bee. Well done, KKK disbands as progressive left, accomplishing all their goals. And they have a picture of this guy in a hood, the KKK Grand Klansman. And behind him is Centennial Elementary School with a little sign that says Families of Color Playground Night. And it's just perfect because it's exactly what you would think that, who's in charge of this kind of nonsense. It's insane. It's insane. And you wonder, at what point will America wake up? And I think America will finally wake up when they finally start calling out these bogus politicians like Elizabeth Warren and like Senator Blumenthal and so many others who are just phonies and in office, and that they're just crooked. Case in point, Elizabeth Warren tweeted out Let's change the rigged tax code so the person of the year will actually pay taxes and stop freeloading off everyone else. So, podcast listeners, Time Person of the Year was just announced, and it is Elon Musk. Elizabeth Warren tweets out, let's change the rigged tax code so the person of the year, referring to Elon Musk, will actually pay taxes and stop freeloading off everyone else. Elon Musk responded, you remind me of when I was a kid and my friend's angry mom would just randomly yell at everyone for no reason. And then Musk tweets again, please don't call the manager on me, Senator Karen. I mean, it's just awesome stuff. And so once again, the Babylon Bee picked this up and they have a picture of Elon Musk and Senator Elizabeth Warren. And they took this tweet, of course, and wrote the story. And it says, white man callously attacks Native American woman. So this is how we fight back. And I've said this repeatedly in Mark and the Millennials. We fight back by making fun of the left and showing how incredibly stupid, at the same time, how incredibly hypocritical they are. And we defeat them by electing people like the governor of Florida, who have managed to marry intellect with policy, and then properly pushing forward the common sense that this country was built on. And that's it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining me. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.